Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another Doctor Who review. And today we shall discover the only lost episode of the fourth Doctor era, but return to us with animation. It's time, my friends, to look into the world of Shada. So, what is Shada about? Well, essentially, there's this book that a professor known as Professor Kronos has essentially misplaced. However, this story starts off with the Doctor and Romana not really knowing anything about this book. They just come to the professor to enjoy some tea with him and reminisce about old days. However, soon after a mysterious stranger begins knocking on Professor Kronos' door, he begins to realize that his crimes are starting to catch up with him. But what crimes could an old Oxford university professor have committed? Well, it turns out he's not really just a average England professor. He is, in fact, a Time Lord, and most importantly, he is Sallyhaven. But he doesn't reveal this straight away. Essentially, this whole story leads up to him revealing himself as Sallyhaven and explaining that apparently he had stolen this book away from Gallifrey and committed many crimes. However, after being admitted to Shada, he realized that he needed to escape, and so he disguised himself on Earth as a normal, ordinary professor. However, after a mysterious stranger begins to turn up, it decides to use an orb against the professor in hopes of stealing his memory and all of his crime history with it, in order to take over the universe. This leads the Doctor and Romana to chase after the professor after they're all taken to a prison known as Shada. Now, the Doctor doesn't believe that Shada really exists. He believes it to be a myth, a folk tale, another fairy story. But when he sees the prison for himself, suddenly he begins to open his eyes and realize that his professor is indeed his old hero, Sallyhaven. However, the poor victim in this whole story is a young man who is just a kind of student who accidentally picks up the book. The Doctor goes searching for the book in hopes of getting to the student before it's too late. However, sadly for the Doctor, it turns out that the student has essentially gotten away from his sight, and the book itself has been procured. It also turns out in this book that a lot of scientists and a lot of criminals from Shada have all been getting their minds drained. The Doctor and Romana eventually manage to shut down the prison and bring the professor back to Oxford. The Doctor also has a really funny, odd encounter with a guy in Oxford who seems to know the Doctor over the centuries. And the funny thing I think that's so beautiful in this story is this idea that this guy who greets the Doctor doesn't really seem to question the fact that he's had a different face. For some reason, it has just become a known factor at Oxford and just been accepted, and I think that's absolutely incredible. However, back to the story of Shada, I feel like one of my favourite ideals that happens in this story is this sphere. It's so interesting to watch Tom Baker get chased down a lane in Oxford by just a spherical disc. And for that reason, I give the Shada a solid 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next Doctor Who review. Until then, goodbye, stay beautiful, and have an incredible night.